So can everyone hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. I just want to start by thanking the organizers for the opportunity and organizing such a nice conference. I haven't been able to see all the papers, I guess, but I will when they get posted. The videos get posted because I guess it was the middle of the night for me when much of the talks were given. But I look forward to seeing them. Second thing is, if you hear any running over my head, that's my son. So, I apologize for that in advance. Third thing is, you'll see that the paper that I'm presenting today is about strategy proofness. This is actually a topic I've never worked on before. I am tremendously fortunate to have the august audience that I have here. So please, if anyone has any comments, suggestions, please just give them to me. My co-author Eve, is quite an expert on the topic, but I'm a complete novice. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about today is about game forms that are strategy proof. So game forms, probably, well, there would be people in the audience who would be familiar with this term, game forms, but maybe some are not. There's that word divorce in there. That's sort of a bit of a red herring. What I'm going to talk to you about are game forms that are strategy proof, and I'm going to be focusing mostly on game forms with two players, so hence the word divorce. But I'm certainly not giving any advice about divorce or how to go about it, or anything like that. Okay, it's just referring to two players. Okay, so without further ado, the first thing I want to do is I want to show you what's a game form and what are we talking about here. Okay, so here we go. There's a game form. So you have a row player and a column player. The outcomes are entries of the matrix. These are abstract outcomes, A, B, C, D. And so the strategies are, the row player has the 4 different strategies, the row strategies, and the column player has 4 different strategies, the column strategies. Okay, so about such a game, I haven't, the strategies are not labeled, which is maybe sort of weird for people. They say, well, that's weird. What is this game about? So there's a very old literature, maybe not super old, but pretty old, about something called Nash solvability, which asks the question, it says, show me a game like this. Is it the case that for every combination of player preferences, there's a pure strategy Nash equilibrium of the game? Okay, so I don't know. Actually, I don't know. There are sufficient, necessary and sufficient conditions for 2 player games, but after that, things get very, very complicated. You could try to ask the same question for different solution concepts. So in particular here, we're interested in strategy proofness, but the answer for strategy proofness is quite boring. So if you look at the game, and as long as there's more than 3 rows or 3 columns, you know what it means for such a game to be strategy proof for all combinations of player preferences. Well, it has to be you have constant rows or constant columns. Okay, that's the Gibbard-Satterthwaite theorem. Okay, so we're going to ask a different question here, in some sense a more restricted question, because of the solution concept that we're looking at. And that question is the following: is it the case for each row and each column I can find a player preference for which that strategy, the corresponding strategy, is a dominant strategy? Okay, so that's the question. So does anyone know the answer for this game form? Please interrupt me. I'd love for somebody to interrupt me here.
Yes.
You do know what it is, Alexander. Okay, so this game form, it's hard to sort of understand it when you maybe just look at it like this, but this is median voting, okay, with 2 agents and a phantom at C. That's what this is. Okay, we're going to understand why that's what this is a little bit later, but that's exactly what this game is. One will notice about this game as well that it has some nice features that have nothing to, that can be explained and formalized without saying anything about the strategies of players, or sorry, about the preferences of players, namely that it's symmetric, and namely that it has just as many rows and columns as it has potential outcomes. Okay, so those are two features of the game which we can talk about without ever talking about the underlying preferences over which it's strategy proof. Okay, that's kind of a nice thing. Okay, so I just want to, that's just sort of give you a taste of what we're doing here. And I want to sort of write down some definitions so that we're clear about where we're going. Okay, so I have a finite domain of social outcomes. Okay, with two players, it doesn't matter whether you think of these as social outcomes or individual outcomes. That doesn't matter here. But with more players, of course, it's going to matter because the voting domain and the allocation domain, have different structures, right? So, but with two players, it doesn't matter. Game forms are going to be just arrays, okay? And strategies are going to correspond to rows or columns in these arrays, okay? And what we're interested in is players with strict preferences or linear order preferences. And the questions that we're going to ask are, as I said, is it the case that each strategy in the game is a dominant strategy for some type of player preference, okay? And if that's true, okay, what does the domain of preferences for which the game is strategy proof look like, okay? Or what is it, or how can we write it down? So it turns out that you can answer these questions at a level of complete generality, okay, in a way which is maybe not so informative. I'm going to start there, but I'm going to proceed and after that and look at more special things. So the question is, why are we doing this? Okay, so why are you looking at these abstract games and asking yourself, are they strategy proof over some domains of preferences? Okay, so one very sensible reason to do that, right, is that you're interested in nice looking rules and you want to understand, the domain over which those nice looking rules are strategy proof. That's an excellent reason to pursue this kind of analysis. And as I pointed out before, some very nice properties of the rules can be written down without saying anything about the underlying preferences or underlying domain of preferences, right? So the symmetry, the fact that I only had the same number of rows and columns as outcomes, those kinds of things, okay? So you can get a lot of mileage by writing down this matrix and say nothing about preferences and then try to figure out what the preferences for which it's going to work are, okay? So that's an agenda that's been pursued. So I should say something. If Anna's listening, I wasn't able to read the dissertation, so please send it to me. I'm sure you have it somewhere, because I would like to read it. But there has been a recent number of papers on this topic, okay? So our interest in this kind of object, these game forms, is actually, I think, is quite different from this particular goal. Our interest is to understand, okay, domains for which there exist strategy proof rules, okay? And the way that that's going to work is that when I write down the matrix or the array, that array or matrix does itself contain the information about the underlying domain for which the game form is strategy proof. Okay. So contained within this thing that's size n squared, you have information about a domain of preferences which is potentially quite large and quite complicated. Okay, so that's the agenda I want to push here. I really strongly believe, and I'm not going to have as much to show for it. I might not be able to convince you of that, but I strongly believe the right way to think about strategy proof, as a complete novice on the topic, that the right way to think about strategy proofness is to think about these game forms because they describe the underlying domains, or they allow you to describe the underlying domains in a way that is actually quite simple, okay? And I hope to convince you of that in some part. Okay. And I should emphasize, the following thing. Okay, so sorry, before I get to that, I agree. I think Salvador's in the audience. I agree with Salvador here that underlying strategy proofness is probably something, if you look at it the right way, something that is relatively simple. But I think the literature that's preceded on this agenda of describing domains for which there are strategy proof and, I should say, also non-dictatorial rules starts for something that's very elegant and beautiful and very simple to describe, which is the single peak domain. And it sort of builds onto there, and you get objects which are kind of more and more Franken objects and more complicated to describe, more and more intricate, and for me, less and less intuitive. So I would like, and I hope that this idea of thinking about the problem in terms of the game forms themselves is going to get us back to something that is a little bit simpler. Okay, that's the hope here. I don't know if I succeed. You'll have to tell me. Are there any questions at this point? No? Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down a very general result, which in some sense answers this question completely and fully, but in a way that's sort of unsatisfactory. Because my objective was to start from something which I sort of put forth to you as being somewhat complicated if you try to describe just the domains where strategy proof rules exist, something that's quite complicated, and this answer here itself is going to be sort of complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about a much more specialized setting with just two players, and I'm going to give you there, I hope, an answer which I think is a lot simpler, and then we'll kind of go from there, try to extend back out this special result to a more general setting. Okay. And then, of course, there's many next steps to go, because the project itself is really only in, I don't know, it's an adolescent now. I mean, it was up until quite recently a child, but it's an adolescent, but it's nowhere near completion, I don't think. Okay. So first things first, and I think that so this is just to give you the definition. Okay. What do I mean that a game form is strategy proof? Well, for each row or column, okay, I can ask myself, is there a preference for which that row is a dominant strategy? Okay. So I can write down this set D script of G sub I, okay? And I can write it down for every row, every column, if I have more than two players, all these different, for every strategy, I can write down such a set, okay? And we're going to say that the game form is strategy proof if all of these sets are non-empty, okay? So what does it mean? And there's two requirements hidden in this definition. The first requirement is that that we're cooking with gas here. There is some combination of player preferences for which this game form is strategy proof. Okay? And more than that, what we're requiring is that none of the rows or none of the columns is redundant. Okay? In the sense that nobody is going to use it as a dominant strategy. Okay? So we're only going to be interested in games where all of the rows and all of the columns get used by some type of agent in a dominant strategy equilibrium. Okay, so that's our definition. So that's the kind of thing I'm interested in characterizing. I want to characterize game forms with this feature. Okay, and it turns out you can do this pretty easily. Okay, and this actually has a lot more to do with the other topic, or the topic that I mostly work on, which is. So you can do this by revealed preference. Okay, what do? It's actually quite simple. You look at the given row of interest, and you look at the entries in that row. Okay, and then you ask yourself, well, fix the strategies of all the other players. If the player wants to play this row, it better be that they're not interested in deviating to a different row that gives them a different outcome. So if they're actually going to play this given row, they're not interested in deviating. So it must be that they prefer what they get in this row to what they would get in that other row. Okay, so that's just what this definition says. So by revealed preference, okay, you can actually write down all of, so you can write down the domains of strategy proofness associated with each one of the rows and columns of the game form you're interested in. Okay, so that's defining the.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
You defined strategy proof in the previous slide. Did you mean strategy proof with respect to a certain row, or was
no?
it?
So I mean, so strategy proof means that all the rows and all the columns have this non-empty domain of preferences for which they're dominant strategies.
So it's not the standard. It's not the standard definition.
Absolutely not. No. Right. That's right. Okay. So maybe I'm misunderstanding here. Why is it not the standard definition?
Because you need a domain for which all rows simultaneously can be used. No. I mean, where is the single domain?
That's going to be the single domain. That's going to be the union of, so for each player, the union of his DGIs is going to be the strategy proof domain for that player. Okay?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay. So when, right. So when I say that it's in some sense it's not the normal definition, it's not the normal definition because I'm insisting on the non-redundancy.
Okay.
I think that for me that's what makes it different from the normal definition. But you're right, it's the union of all these DGIs that's going to be the strategy proof domain for that given player, for the player I.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so I can do this by revealed preference, and it turns out that if you give me a game form, I can run through this, revealed preference analysis, and I know that the game form is going to be strategy proof over some domain associated with each player, some non-empty domain associated with each player, where actually, in fact, each row is used as a dominant strategy by some type of that player. If and only if these revealed preference relations that I end up with are acyclic. Okay. All right. Okay. So that's, in some sense, I've solved the problem. It is complete generality. Okay. And so how do I define the domains? Well, for each given row, the preferences for which that row is going to be a dominant strategy is going to be the strict preferences that complete my revealed preference relation. Okay. So in some sense, I've answered the question, but I haven't in some sense given very much insight into strategy proofness. Okay, so I write down this result. This is probably a result that people who work on this topic say, well, I knew this before I heard you say it, and that's probably right, yeah. But it is a result that, although we don't use the result itself, we don't want to feature it as one of our main results, we do use it. It's very helpful to think about the problem. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to. What's that?
Sorry, another clarifying question. I'm really slow. Sorry, it's the end of the day. What do you mean by the set of preferences that complete a relation between X and Y? Be precise. No, just to be precise.
Okay, so,
set of preferences?
so these objects in SGI, those are binary relations, right? So, yes. So the binary relations in P are linear orders, right? So what I'm looking for are elements of P which are supersets of the SGIs. Okay, so this is what I mean.
Since SGI is acyclic, it's non-empty.
Okay. Yeah. So by complete, right? I'm not just taking the transitive closure. I'm doing more than that. Right. So that I have to write it down this way, or maybe there's a better way, but that's what I've done.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the very general result. I just want to kind of show you how that works in the example before. And remember, I said the first example, that's just median voting with a with a phantom at C. And so there's the matrix I had before. And so let's think about the first column. In the first column, the first row reveals that A is the best alternative. Okay. The second row reveals that B is better than C. The third row reveals that C is better than D. Okay. So if I say take the second column, I can do this similar kind of analysis. And what I end up with are 4 of these. So for each column, I have a different binary relation, and they're all featured below here, right? So A, of course, is a singleton. So that first preference is just a single. There's only one preference that corresponds with that S when I'm going to call SA, and that's the linear order ABCD, okay, which is what you would expect in the single peak domain. From the other end, at the other end of the single peak domain, you actually have DC, and then if it was just single peak domain, it would DC B and then A. But in fact, this game form allows for either A or B to be last ranked by the kind of player who's going to end up choosing the last column. If you happen to have a top that's located at the median at C, any preference is going to work for that type of agent. The B preference also is it is actually, like the A preference is the kind of classical single peaked one, right? Which is that B has to be the top, and then A has to be below, and C has to be below, and D has to be below C. Okay. All right. So that's the reveal preference analysis from that game form, and that's what it looks like. Okay. So here's the domain. Okay. So it's bigger than the single peak domain. Not in ways which are potentially very meaningful or interesting, but that's the result of this kind of analysis. So I actually want to think about a much simpler setting with just 2 players. I mean, the example I've given only has 2 players, and where I want to impose some special structure on the game form, which I'm going to do here, right? So I'm going to define what that is. So in fact, the game form that we looked at already has this special structure that I'm going to be interested in. The first thing is that it's X by X. So if the set of outcomes is big X, I have 1 row and 1 column for each outcome. Okay, I'm going to call that feature tops only. Well, for now, you're going to say, what do you mean? But I'm going to call that feature tops only. The second feature is that that if you look at the main diagonal, all of the entries are different. Okay, I'm going to call that feature unanimity. Okay, the third structural feature of these game forms I'm interested in is symmetry, which is, I mentioned before, which is along the main diagonal. I have symmetry across the 2 players. Okay. And it turns out that if you insist on matrices, and you can of course generalize this notion to more than 2 players, if you insist on game forms with these features, you end up with domains, or sorry, you end up with rules in some sense, which actually have these corresponding properties. Okay, so this is in some sense the tremendous power of starting with the game forms. You can actually get a lot of mileage without saying anything about the domain. The properties are inherited from these structural features of the game forms. You might ask, well, why don't you want to put another sensible characteristic that you would want to impose on the rules might be efficiency. Efficiency is something that's not easy to describe structurally, right? It's something also which it doesn't necessarily, it's not going to be that important in the following sense. If I have a game form that's strategy proof, okay, that means that each row is going to correspond with a non-empty domain of preferences. Okay, it is the case, okay, when I have game forms with this 2Z, which we call 2Z structure, that there's a non-empty subset of the preferences associated with each row, okay, for which that game form is going to be efficient. So in some sense, adding efficiency as a requirement to the kind of analysis is difficult from a structural point of view because it's not written in the structure of the game form explicitly. And it's also not necessarily that important because as long as I'm identifying features of the game form that make it a strategy-proof game form, there is an efficient domain underneath there, okay, which is a subdomain of the domain defined by these S relations, but it's a non-empty subdomain for each of the rows and each of the columns. So I'm not going to worry about efficiency at this point. I think it's something that's interesting to think about, but I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so these are the objects I'm looking at. These are very simple game forms which are highly structured, okay? So what I hope to say is, I hope to say something about strategy proofness for these very highly structured, very specialized game forms. Okay? And I can, okay? And in some sense, the key to this analysis is going to be a binary relation that Anna defines in her dissertation. It's the following binary relation. It's this binary relation P, and it says that if I look at the XY entry of my matrix, okay, so where X and Y are different, if it's X, then I'm going to say XPY. Okay, so I'm going to define this binary relation this way. Okay, in some sense, it's XPY if, you know, as between the agent whose top is X and whose top is Y, you pick the outcome favored by the X agent. That's the interpretation of the binary relation, but yeah. So hopefully that's clear what this binary relation is. Okay? So the thing that I hope to convince you of in the time that I have left, and how much time do I have left actually?
You have 8 minutes and then 5 minutes for questions.
Okay, so in the time I have left, what I hope to convince you of is that understanding this binary relation, that in some sense this binary relation is the key to understanding strategy proofness of game forms in this specialized setting. Okay, and the first step, right, is the following. Okay, I'm going to define what, give me two outcomes, X and Y. I'm going to define the least upper bound, which is a potentially non-empty set of alternatives, which are either, so Z is a least upper bound of X and Y if Z is either equal to X or P bears P to X, or equal to Y or bears P to Y, and it's the it's the least in terms of P alternative for which this is the case. Okay, so this is a potentially non-empty set of least upper bounds, and I'm going to give you a necessary condition for strategy proofness in this setting. Okay, so a game form, a 2Z game form, is strategy proof only if each of the entries in the matrix, okay, is a least upper bound for the underlying rows and columns, and there's no cycle of alternatives. So in terms of P, no P cycle of alternatives that bears P to the alternative X. So how does this work? Here's another game form. Okay, so let's try to check these properties. Let's look at the last row or last column. Okay, and I can find a cycle in the revealed preference of that D player. Okay, of that D column. What is it? Well, it's A is preferred to B, okay, by the first row. B is preferred to C by the second row, and C is preferred to A. So there can be no player who plays that last column in dominant strategies. Okay. So what's going on here is actually I have a cycle ABC in terms of the P relation. I have a cycle ABC, and each one of the alternatives in that cycle ABC bears P to the alternative D. So the red letters tell you there's a cycle ABC.
Where did you get C is preferred to A? You said
What's
A
that?
above B, B above C, and then you said C is preferred to A. From where? Not from the last column.
The third row of the last column.
Right.
Yeah.
So you are, yes, but I thought you were only talking about the last column.
I'm talking about the last column. So think of the last column as a strategy, right? So if you choose that last column, you choose, if we end up, if the other player is playing row 1, it's because you like A better than B. If the other player is playing row 2, it's because you like B better than C. If the other player is playing row 3, it's because you like C better than A.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
So that's the revealed preference analysis. But actually, if you distill it, what's going on here is I have a cycle in the P relation, ABC, and that cycle bears P to the alternative D. That's my necessary condition. So I went from this world of thinking about these S relations, okay, to now just talking about P. Okay, so and sometimes I've simplified things considerably, I think. Okay, so that's a necessary condition. It's not sufficient. Why is that? Well, if you look at this matrix, much more complicated, you actually have a revealed preference cycle for this second last column. Okay, but it's not the cycle itself is not just defined by P, and the reason why that is because the right, this last row, it's not the case that B bears P to A. So if you look at the matrix and you define the P relation, it's not the case that B bears P to A, but it is the case that you have a row where A is the outcome, and if you deviated, you could get B. Okay? So, and the reason for that is the reason for the fact that it's not that B does not bear P to A is that both of them happen to be least upper bounds for that row column combination. Okay, so I had to choose one of them to put in that entry. I chose A, but I could have chosen B, but I chose A. So it's not that I have a cycle in P. It's that the fact that among the two least upper bounds, we put A there rather than B. Okay? So actually, if you have a unique least upper bound, you don't need to worry about this problem. You never have entries of the matrix which are indeterminate. Okay, when you talk about the P relation, the P relation itself determines all the entries of the matrix. Okay? So when that's the case, those conditions I put down in theorem 2 are sufficient. Okay. So there's a nice special case of that, and that special case is when I have a rule that's top selective. So for each row column combination, I either choose the top of the row player or the top of the column player. But there's also lots of game forms for which I don't have a top, it's not top selective. So here's an example where there's a unique least upper bound. The P relation turns out to be a semi-lattice for that median voter example from the beginning. So what do I do more generally when the P relation doesn't tell me what should be all the entries of the game form? Well, I have this result. So again, it better be that the game form picks a least upper bound for any row column combination. But now I'm interested in looking at cycles, which don't necessarily P dominate, but which do P dominate, but which are not necessarily P cycles, which are cycles in terms of this revealed preference relation Sx. Okay. So now I have what's crept back in is S. Okay. So what I don't like about this is that I started by telling you all you really need to know about strategy proofness in this setting is to understand this P relation. Okay. Now in this theorem 3, what's crept back in is this S relation, this revealed preference relation. Okay. So I'm going to propose a sufficient condition which gets rid of that. Okay. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I wanted to convince you that in some sense, understanding strategy proofness, at least in the setting of these 2Z games, was in some sense kind of be reduced to thinking about this P relation. And why do I think that's the case? Well, I have this condition here, this sufficient condition. So let's start with the P relation and let's build a game form. Okay. So can I build one that is strategy proof? And I can build one that is strategy proof under the following conditions. If the P relation that I start with, some abstract binary relation, has the following features: it's irreflexive and asymmetric, and for any two alternatives, the least upper bound is well defined, and also that there is some super relation of this P that I started with, which has the unique least upper bound property and doesn't have a Q cycle that dominates any given alternative. So what I'm telling you, what this result is telling you here is, how do you build strategy-proof game forms with this 2Z structure? Start with binary relations that have the least upper bound property and don't have cycles that dominate any given alternative. Okay. Now remove edges from this binary relation. Remove them. So remove them in such a way that I still always maintain the existence of a least upper bound for any two alternatives. Okay. Now I can potentially complete these, the matrices that are going to be defined by these more sparse binary relations. I can complete them in a way that doesn't look like the original binary relation. So I can start with, in some sense, these very nice structured binary relations. I can take edges away and I can create a much wider class of strategy-proof game forms. So that's what this result is telling you. So here's an example. Here I don't have a unique least upper bound for the alternatives C and C prime. It could be B, could be B prime. But of course, if I draw an edge between B and B prime, I now have a unique, I have these two properties that are satisfied, right? I have a unique least upper bound, okay? And I don't have any cycles that are dominating alternatives. So if you started with your P relation as this relation, how can I check that I can define a strategy-proof game form associated with it? Well, I can check because I can fill in an edge between B and B prime. However I do that, I end up with a binary relation that satisfies these two conditions in P. So that's sort of all I wanted to say about this topic. I think I've run over time, and I'm sorry, it's the first time I'm presenting this. A lot of things remain to be done on this topic. There's still this gap between the necessary condition, which is very simple, and this condition that I really quickly went over in Theorem 4, which is sufficient. I didn't say anything about the connection between the P relation and the underlying domains of strategy proofness, but actually this connection is quite simple, and it's worth writing down explicitly what the connection is. And of course, I need to go beyond two agents, and I need to go beyond tops only rules. But I think it's a start. Sorry I've gone over time.
Thank you very much, Sean. So we had some questions on the way. A question from Salvador, yes?
Salvador, yes. Okay, you are guilty that I won't be able to sleep tonight because this is a recurrent theme for almost 50 years, and now you reopened it, okay? But thank you for doing it. It's very stimulating. Now, one short comment is that there is this very early paper by Sonnenschein and Schmeidler, who provided a proof of the Gibber-Sutter weight, the first direct proof, by analyzing the case of 2 people, 3 alternatives. Mm-hmm. And of course, since their purpose was to show the Gibber-Sutter weight theorem, they did not assume a cyclicity, but the reasoning they were using is exactly the kind of reasoning that you mentioned here. So I would recommend to everyone, in fact, but in particular to those of you who work on that, to reread Sonnenschein and Schmeidler. And it's a very beautiful paper, and it uses these 2x2, 3x2 matrices, and then proceeds by induction. So this is a comment. The other comment is that, of course, I mean, the advantage of getting two individuals only is that the option sets are very, very clear, right? And so I think that the big jump is to find the appropriate way to deal and to define eventually binary relations or the like in the case where your option sets are more complex and involve the strategies of more than one individual.
You can always look at the two-player projections or the like a kind of two-player projections of I
don't know. This is a general comment, and maybe you have it all solved. For me, it is a challenge that I will try to solve in the next 15 or 30 years. But you will have solved it earlier than that, and it will be very interesting. And the only question is this non-redundancy. This has to do with ontoness, or what does it have to do with? I didn't quite understand what non-redundancy meant.
Oh, I should stop sharing. So the non-redundancy here is just so that, in some sense, when we're looking at these game forms, all of the rows and all of the columns matter, right? We don't want to look at objects that are bigger than we need to, in some sense, to describe the underlying domains. So what we're trying to do is look at, objects which are as small as possible.
But would it hurt you to have extras?
No, it wouldn't.
Okay.
No, it doesn't have to be dominant. This is the wonderful thing about dominant strategy is, that doesn't matter, right? These columns which are no good never matter, right? Okay. You can just get rid of them or not. You can keep them too, but we'd like to look at this one.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Brief question, Sean. Also a bit like when Salvador's comment about literature. When you were mentioning early work done in that same sort of format, did you have in mind Vladimir Gurvich's results on what I think he called Nash solvable game forms? Or is it a reference that you are not familiar with? I know it's a bit difficult to find, but he had a complete characterization of the case of Nash, the case of two-person game forms in which there is always, I don't think he had unique Nash, but at least a Nash or something like that. So was this part of the early literature building up?
Yeah, okay, right. So how all of this started, it was a couple summers ago. I sent Eve some of the papers of Gurvich and I think the man's a genius. I mean, I know that he's affiliated with the Higher School of Economics. I think he's a genius, that guy. You know, that stuff doesn't, some of his work, I mean, is not as well widely read as it should be. Yes, I absolutely had his stuff in mind. Absolutely. Yeah.
Because there must be some connection between the conditions. Sorry.
Yeah, so he's interested in Nash. So the conditions are not the ones we're interested in, right? And as I pointed out, you can ask a sensible question about Nash, about all combinations of player preferences, which you can't ask for dominant strategies, right? Just because you get a boring answer. But absolutely, our original inspiration was Nash solvability and some of the work of Vladimir Gurvich. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I should have said his name before.
Hi, Sean.
All right.
Hi.
Oh, Arunava.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Sean. So as I understand what you're doing is, I'm just trying to contrast it with the standard characterizing the domain approach, right? Which is that you start, you're asked the question, what is the domain over which you can find some nice strategy-proof social choice functions, et cetera, some other properties. Here you're saying, I'm giving you a potential candidate for a social choice function. Can I construct a domain for which this looks like the social choice function, right? I mean, this looks like the strategy-proof social choice function, right? So, so as I understood, I mean, have you compared how the results look like? I mean, between these two things. I mean, you wrote the middle bullet point of your last slide. You had 3 of them, and you made a comment there saying that the relationship between the P and the domain. So I was wondering if there is a direct link between that. I mean, you can use the P, for instance, to construct the underlying relation on preferences like single peaked and those kinds of things, right? So.
So we haven't done this work, but like if you start, so just what you do is like write down the the 2-player median voting rules for different hops, and then forget what the labels are for the strategies, and now write down the corresponding P's. You're gonna see this is something we need to kind of unpack a little bit. You're gonna see a very nice connection between the P's that you define and the line, the line of over which you have single peakness. So there is this connection. That's right. And so part of what we're trying to do, and this is the part we haven't really got to yet, is to kind of really now then once we have a nice characterization, okay, to kind of then bring it back to the preferences. Because the other work that's been done on this topic where they've been interested in P, they've imposed extra structure on P, which requires it to be a semi-lattice or requires it to not have like I didn't give any good. I looked now, before I did my presentation, I said, there's no cycles in any of these P's that I've showed them today, which is a shame because the kinds of P's that we're allowed or equipped to deal with can have lots of cycles and weird stuff in them. But people have looked at these P's, but really kind of the nicest P's that are out there. And we want to look at all the P's. So the nicest P's tend to correspond, from what I understand of this literature, the nicest P's tend to correspond to, and this language becomes complicated, these kind of semi-single peaked or partially single, correspond to those kinds of domains. But we allow for objects which are a little bit more complicated because the P's can have cycles in them. As long as the cycles don't screw things up in the way that some of my theorems, I hope.
But it's intermediate through this game form, right? So, so I mean, the connection is not immediate. So if I look at the domain, I could be looking at the wrong game form or something like that, right? I mean,
so Sean, I'm sorry. Before you answer, we have to start closing now. I don't want to interrupt your discussion, so please continue. It's just we will be closing off and logging off. So see you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Ariel. Ariel has left already. And see you tomorrow. So the Zoom will be on. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
See you tomorrow.
Okay. So one thing you can do, Arunava, is as I said, right? You could say, okay, I know these rules, some of these familiar rules that are out there. Write them down. Yeah. Right? And write it down. Now forget the labels on the strategies.
Yes.
Compute. Okay, compute the domains, and now compare back to the, oh, I thought this rule was about single peak domains, or I thought it was about semi. And you'll discover that it's about something probably generally more general than that, because there's always these regularity conditions that seem to be imposed.
Yeah, I'm just saying, anyway, perhaps we can carry on the discussion later. But just the final point is, suppose I was interested in the domain question.
Yeah.
Right? But you're starting with the game form.
Yeah, yeah.
Correct? And okay, so there exists a domain, course, I mean, I'm looking at the game form and then looking for the domain. So, but if I were looking for a domain, then
then you probably want to follow the prescriptions of somebody else, right? In some sense.
Okay.
And just as a complete ignoramus on the topic, I actually think this has been a hindrance. So I think that's been the hindrance. I don't think I'm going to get, I don't think that Eve and I, probably Eve more than me, but I don't think we're going to get all the answers here. But I think it's the right way to start thinking about getting all the answers. I think Eve says, no, you're being too ambitious. I really do, because I think the object is simple.
It's a different question, I think. It's a different question from the classical question. Whether it can, I mean, that's what I think. I mean, whether it can throw light on the classical question is a different question. But this question maybe, is interesting. So, I mean, those are two different things. Anyway.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. So, I mean, it's a different way to look at it anyway.
Thanks for your comments.
Okay, thanks.
James.
Bye.
Does anyone else have a question? I'm sorry, I've kept you guys very, very long in all of this. I think most people left anyways. No other questions? Okay.